Y'all already know the drill. Let me know where you chiming in from. Let me know where you are tapping in from. Look, today we're going to talk about ownership. I don't know if you all are seeing what's taking place in the economy. I don't know if you all are seeing what's taking place economically, but we're gonna touch on that a little bit here today. But more importantly, I just wanted to come on here and really just share my story. You know, I see we got Los Angeles in the house. Who else we have in the house? We got, I think, is that Charlotte? Milwaukee is in the building. Welcome, Milwaukee. I just left Milwaukee. It was like negative 10 degrees out there in Milwaukee. Milwaukee is in the building. We got San Diego. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started because, you know, I have a very busy day tomorrow, and I have some information that I would like to share with each and every last one of you. We got the Bronx in the house. So I'm looking at two different screens. I got Instagram, I got YouTube, I got Facebook up. So bottom line, listen, all right, Tampa, what's going on? Charlotte, North Carolina. So as long as I've been traveling, people have asked me, Will, like, what's the secret? You know, how do I get to that next level? How do I level up? How do I make more money? How do I change my financial circumstance? I've tried everything. I've tried Turo. I've tried Airbnb. I've tried this. I've tried to start a barbershop. I've tried to start a nail tech business. What is it that changed for you? What is it that clicked? How can I get to that next level? And I'm going to just be brutally candid here with you all today. See, I didn't come from some fancy background. I didn't, you know, I didn't have all of the mechanics of success when I first started out. You know, I remember literally moving to Las Vegas, Nevada in 2005. I had $500 to my name. And, you know, shout out to my mentor, John Malott. I actually just posted in my Instagram stories today. More people should actually pay homage to their mentors. You know, one thing that I often tell people, like, I'm always telling John, like, how much I appreciate him. If it wasn't for John Malott, I would not be here today. You know, so I'm always going to shout out my mentor, shout out John Malott, because he saw more in me than I saw in myself at the time. But the thing that he did is he forced greatness out of me. John Malott forced greatness out of me, and he was able to do that by getting me to think differently. He was getting me to think differently. I used to think like a broke person. I used to always think just because, you know, I couldn't afford it, that it wasn't possible. I used to think that because I seen other people who were accomplishing things that they were lucky. I used to think just because, you know, that I wasn't able to buy a house or drive a certain type of vehicle, I thought that I was cursed. And none of those things were true. And none of those things still are not true. What I had to learn is that there is a fundamental blueprint. There is an instruction manual to positioning yourself to accomplishing something. And I'll prove it to you. If you want to be an engineer, okay? If you want to be an engineer, one of the ways of guaranteeing your success of being an engineer is you can go to school to learn about engineering. If you want to be a doctor, you can go to school and learn about whatever area of medicine that you want to become a specialist in. If you want to be an attorney, okay? If you want to be an attorney, you go to school to learn whatever area of practice you want to become proficient in. Why is it that when it comes to understanding how to make money, how to build wealth, we just assume that we do not have to get trained on that? What's up, Brian? We just assume that you don't need to be trained on that. And so in 2003, I was being trained to be successful. I was being trained to learn how to build wealth. I was being trained on my mindset. I had to literally undownload all of the negativity from the neighborhood I grew up in, my friends, my family. Like, I had to unlearn all of the things from the people who had indoctrinated me with information. And these were people who I would not change lives with if you paid me. You just couldn't. And so, I was fortunate enough to have a mentor by the name of John Malott. And the biggest lesson that he provided me was personal development. He said, Will, until you change the way you think, you will never be successful, ever. And he said, and I'll prove it to you. This is why lottery winners go broke. This is why the athlete goes broke. This is why the entertainer, the movie star, this is why people who come into a windfall of money or an inheritance, this is why they go broke, because they have not changed the way that they think. And so John said, Will, I promise you, if you follow everything that I tell you, your life will never be the same. He said, Will, if you follow every single thing that I tell you, your life will never be the same. And he said, now, what I'm going to share with you, it is not about being the best salesman. It is not about being in the right product, or like, you have to be able to understand how money works, how money makes you money, how to position yourself. There is an exact formula. And then the first book he gave me was Think and Grow Rich. This was in 2003, ladies and gentlemen. He gave me the book Think and Grow Rich. Up until this point, since I graduated high school, I had never picked up a book. So I went through and read Think and Grow Rich. It took me a very long time to get through it, just because I was not used to reading and I wasn't an avid reader. And at this time, audio books wasn't. I would have had, I think I could have went to the library to get the audio book, which eventually I did go and do so. But it was a completely foreign language to me. Thinking positively was foreign. That was a foreign language. Thinking about winning. I was around people who didn't have a winning mentality. Winning to the people that I was around at that time was being able to have enough money for the weekend to go to the club and turn up. That was winning to the people who I was around in 2003. So I had to change everything. I had to learn about the fear of ghost, the ghost of fear. I had to learn about the difference between a business and running a company. I had to learn about goal setting. And one of my very first goals was that John challenged me is he had me go get a blank check and write out the dollar amount that I wanted to be able to cash without my bank account going into negative. And I remember this like yesterday. I remember getting a blank check, and I wrote out a check for $15,000. And at that time, I never in my wildest imagination thought that I would ever be able to cash a check for $15,000. First of all, I had never saved more than $2,000 in my bank account back in 2003. So being able to cash a check for $15,000, I didn't think it was possible. And he said, Will, you have to change the way you think. You're still thinking like a broke person. And so as I fast forward, then eventually he gave me the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. My subconscious had completely unlocked from the poverty-stricken language that I had been taught all my life up until that point, once I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. See, everything that I learned in the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad taught me that if I wanted to stay poor, continue doing the things that poor strategies or that poor people have been teaching me. Everything that Robert Kiyosaki talked about when in relation to his Poor Dad, it was everything that I had been taught up until that point. And nobody who was teaching me those things, which were not the things that I wanted to, everything that Robert Kiyosaki Poor Dad was teaching was coming from people who did not have the life I wanted to live. And then here I am, I'm looking at my mentor, John Malott, who was a high school dropout, who had been to prison for drugs and had went through all of these things in life, but yet he's living the life that I wanted to live. He was retired in his I think in his 30s. He was driving the cars I wanted to drive. He was taking the trips I wanted to take. And then once he started to teach me about concepts, my mind was forever changed. And so when I read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki talks about one fundamental principle that changed my life. I still listen to it once in a year. Absolutely. He said OPM. Who knows what OPM means in the chat? Type it in the chat. And if you're just tuning in, I got Facebook and YouTube up. I got Instagram up, so I'm looking at two different screens. So Robert Kiyosaki shared an acronym, OPM. Who knows what OPM stands for? When I learned what that was, it changed my entire life. Who knows what OPM stands for? When I learned what OPM was, my life was forever changed. And so in the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki talks about OPM, which stands for other people's money. And once I started to learn that the only way you get to the next level is you have to learn how to use OPM. I'll prove it to you. Go look to see how Airbnb got its start. Airbnb used over $1 billion worth of debt. Go look at and see how PayPal got its start. Go look and see how Tesla got its start. Go look and see how X, formerly known as Twitter. Go look and see how Apple, Steve Jobs used debt to get started with Apple when he was buying computer parts. And so as I started to piece all of these puzzles, as I started to put all these puzzle pieces together, it dawned on me, I'm like, why is it that people who are not where they want to be trying to give me advice on a strategy leveraging debt, but then the strategy that they did give me isn't even working for them? So I said, you know what? I'm going to lock in. I'm going to stay over here. I said, John, what's next? And so John said, Will, you're going to have to get out of your environment. And so he literally gave me 500. He let me, I'm condensing the story. So he asked me, hey, Will, would you be open to moving out of Milwaukee? And I said, yes, but I don't have any money at the time, but I'm ambitious. And so he literally wrote me a check for $500. He gifted me and said, this isn't enough to take care of you, but that's not my job. My job is just to give you a springboard. You've been in a gym training with the books and studying and learning and all of my journals that I have. I've been doing and working on my lessons. And so I literally moved to Las Vegas, Nevada, October 5th, 2005. I had $500 to my name, and I quickly found out that when you do not have a plan, life can get very rigid. Life can get very rugged. So moved to Las Vegas in 2005, got out here, and I didn't have a real plan, but I was determined to figure it out. And so I decided to go back to the basics. If you're following me, type the word basics in the chat. I decided to go back to the basics. So I went back and reread the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad one more time at this time, and it unlocked something different. This is why I tell people you have to go over this content and information and read the books over and over and over and study your notes over and over and over, because it unlocks something different. Because when you first get into this realm, this is a new language for you. This is a brand new language. And so it is impossible for you to understand what it is that you want to do when it's brand new to you. So I'm in Las Vegas. I have $500 to my name. And as you all know, $500 does not go very far, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't go very far. And so you're looking at a gentleman who, dropped out of college. I was, laid off from the job I thought I was going to retire from back in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was there for 8 years. I had to had to be gifted $500 by my mentor. I moved to Las Vegas. I didn't know anyone, didn't have a house. Like, I had nothing. Now to being in a position where I own over 70 doors. And if I never wanted to work, or if I never wanted to do another live, or if I never wanted to speak on another stage, I don't have to. Not because I was lucky, not because, I had a family who injected financial astuteness into me, not because I did a semester of college. It was because I had a blueprint. If you're following me, type the word blueprint in the chat. See, I want you to go into 2026 no longer making excuses. Because if you're on one of my socials listening to me right now, you have an unfair advantage. If you're still poor in 2026, that is your fault. If you're still struggling in 2026, not at the beginning, we're going to say midway in, that is going to be your fault. And the reason it will be your fault is because I'm going to throw everything at you, including the kitchen sink this coming up year, so that you are no longer in your same circumstance financially. And I'm going to give you my exact blueprint that took me from being homeless with $500 to now having over 70 doors. What's going on, fam? And so now you may say, well, Will, you had it easy. No, I didn't. My journey was actually 10 times harder than most of you. There was no social media. As a matter of fact, when I moved to Las Vegas, I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a vehicle. Eventually, I was able to get a vehicle. Then I never could afford to make the payment. I never could afford to register a car. So I'm hiding my vehicle from the repo man. And then one day I sat down and I said, man, I need to make some money. So one of the things I started doing to make money is I started cutting hair. I was a mobile barber. Again, you could fact check this. Matter of fact, my ad is still up on yellowpages.com. So anybody who wants to fact check me, go to yp.com. That's Y is in yellow, P is in pages. Go to yp.com, and the business name I used was Your Mobile Barber. I actually started cutting hair just to make money, just to make ends meet. Because I was determined to change my circumstance. I was willing to accomplish whatever I had to do by any means necessary. I don't have a choice. I helped my wife with school. Now she's about to graduate with her master's and move on to her doctorate. She already got a job with the master's. Now, today I'm not here to talk about anything related to a degree. The only degree you need to have is the degree of separation from an individual who can teach you the blueprint. And that's what I'm going to do here today. So I would literally go and cut hair just to be able to get to the next day, to buy meals and pay my rent and different things of that nature. I was willing to take on that job just so I can make sure that I can, eventually get into my own apartment. I was working extremely hard, but it seemed like no matter how hard I worked, I was still always at a deficit. I was still robbing Peter to pay Paul. I was still trying to figure out something that I didn't know. I was always stuck financially. If you ever felt stuck financially, type me in the chat. If you ever felt stuck financially, type me in the chat. If you ever felt stuck financially, because that was me. At one point, I was making my highest income at yellowpages.com was $110,000 a year. And yet I still never had anything. Yeah, I was able to get a house, but I didn't have anything. And that's because the more money I make, the more I was taxed. 30% of every dollar I made went to Uncle Sam. So if I made 100,000, 30,000 went to taxes. When you make 100,000, that's not what goes to your bank account. The other 64% was used just to pay bills. I don't know if you've ever actually sat down and did the math. Here's what I want you to imagine. Imagine this. Imagine that if you don't figure out a way to make more money without giving more time, you have to work forever. That was the only nightmare I needed for me to change my life. I literally was laying in bed one night and I said, damn, I have to do this for the rest of my life. I have to wake up when it's dark outside, go to work, come home when it's dark outside. And if I miss more than 3 days unpaid, I will not be able to live here. If I miss more than 2 weeks of unpaid, I will not. If I miss a paycheck, if I miss a 3 weeks worth of work without being paid, I'm back homeless. That was the scariest dream, the most lucid dream I could ever have in my life. I said, I got to do something different. Because I kept fighting the urge, because I kept listening to people who didn't even have it all. So I had to fight the urge to do what was right. Let me say that again. I literally was fighting the urge to do what was right. And what was right was investing in myself. I was like, Will, how could you had read Think and Grow Rich? How could you had read Who Moved My Cheese? How could you had read Rich Dad Poor Dad? How could you had read The Secret? How could you had read Purpose Driven Life? How could you had read Rich Dad Poor Dad? How could you had read Cash Flow Quadrant? And you're still doing the old things. And that's when I realized I had to divorce my old self. I had to divorce who I used to be and focus on who I was becoming. I had to focus and find the blueprint to doing the things that everybody who was successful and was winning, I'm going to do exactly what it is that they were doing. And I just remember going back to the basics of what John used to tell me. You have to be willing to do what others won't do so you can have what others will never have. So I was willing to sacrifice. And so I told myself, you know what? Every successful business uses debt. I'm going to figure out how to use debt. And so I remember watching a video with Robert Kiyosaki. And Robert Kiyosaki talked about how he bought his very first investment property using a credit card. Robert Kiyosaki said, I bought my very first investment property using one of these. And my mind was blown. I said, I need to figure out how he did that. And so I did a little bit more digging. And then I found a video where he said he found a property in Waikiki, Hawaii for $20,000. And he needed 20% down. And so the 20%, which is $4,000, he took from a credit card. Already my mind was blown away, because the thing I did know is that I couldn't even save $4,000, even when I was making $100,000 a year. But I can go to the bank and borrow $4,000 in the next 7 days. And so then he said, all he had to make sure is that the rent from the property can cover the mortgage and the credit card payment. That's it. And so he broke down the math. He said, so he borrowed the $4,000 from the credit card, put that down on the property. the bank is going to cover the other 80%, and the rents was able to cover the mortgage and the credit card payment, and he made $25 after his net income. And I was like, wow. I said, how many times can I do that? And I said, all I got to do is go out there, get some credit, buy some real estate, and make sure the rent cover the mortgage and the debt. That's it. Because all I'm going to do is compound my rental payments. That's all I got to figure out. And then as I started reading more books like The Creature of Jekyll Island and I forgot the other book about The Secret of Oz. If you haven't read that book, The Secret of Oz, you can actually even go and listen to it on YouTube for free. If you have not read or listened to the audiobook, The Secret of Oz, you want another scary story to read? Go learn about how if you do not learn how to master debt, you will forever be poor. Now, I'm not talking about consumer debt. I'm talking about playing the game that the banks play. So I was literally able to go from $500 to building a 7-figure real estate portfolio, playing the game of Monopoly with somebody else's money. Crack the code. Somebody type in the chat, crack the code. I then cracked the code. Somebody said use fake money to acquire assets. That's exactly how Monopoly works. When you play the game of Monopoly, where do you borrow your money from when you first start? The bank. It blows my mind that people play the game of Monopoly, but they don't know how to play Monopoly. It's mind blowing. See, my mission is to help everyday people become wealth leaders. My mission is to help everyday people become wealth leaders. My mission is to help you get your first or your next investment property literally in the next 90 days. I don't know if you all are seeing what's taking place right now in this real estate market. I don't know if you all are paying attention to what's going on economically. But the way they dropping the prices of housing, there's not even enough houses. See, we owe it to ourselves to play this game. We owe it to ourselves. King PM3 said, I love being the banker in the game of Monopoly. Me too. I'm a private money lender. See, let me tell you about my client, Katina Street. Katina started working with me. She joined my inner circle and she said, Will, I already own real estate, but the way you're teaching people how to do this, the time it took me to get these 2 properties, I could have a multitude more doors doing it the way you did it. I said, why is that? She said, because I had to use my own money. So we took Katina through one bank. We got Katina $125,000. One bank. Tomorrow, I'm actually hosting a webinar tomorrow. I'm giving away 15 banks tomorrow where you can go and get funding literally within the next 30 days for real estate. Ladies and gentlemen, you only need $25,000 to get your first property. Everybody type in the chat $25,000. I see the people on Instagram are too cool. That's fine. That is fine. I remember I went to a speaking event once, and I was sitting in the front row, and I had my arms crossed, legs crossed. I had on some dirty Timbs, and he asked me to take notes, and I said, no, I'm cool. He was like, yeah, because being cool going to keep you broke. Ever since then, I take notes. You only need $25,000 to buy an investment property. I've figured out how to make this a mathematical equation. For every $25,000, it secures a property for $100,000. Let me share a story real quick before I get off of here, and then I'm gonna tell y'all how to join my webinar tomorrow. It's free. So I was watching a video with this lady who talked about how one investment property changed their entire family's lives. Let me say that again. One investment property changed their entire family's lives. She bought her grandfather had bought an investment property back in the 70s for $100,000. Okay, it was like in the 70s. So this is 2 generations removed from her. Fast forward to 2025, her grandfather passed away. And when he passed away, they actually end up selling the property. And they sold the property because they needed the money to be able to pay off some debt. And the siblings were fighting. It was like 5 siblings. It was her parents and 4 other siblings. And so she said that when this is where the light bulb clicked for her in understanding the power of real estate. That one property her grandfather bought in the 70s, it was valued at over $1 million in 2025. After they sold that property, split it amongst the 5 siblings, her family, her parents used that money to pay off all of their consumer debt, which now put them in an unfair advantage financially, to the point to now they started going out there and investing in real estate. Think about how powerful that story is. My grandfather, who used to own 45 houses at one point, tried to give me his real estate portfolio. I turned it down because I was too cool. That's why I was broke. If I would have kept those investment properties today, at minimum, the portfolio would be valued at $8 million. He owned those properties in the 70s. Even if I took the average property and did it at $200,000 right now, over $8 million. Ladies and gentlemen, I bought 4 properties in 2019. For $170,000. That's $45,000 a piece. I just did a cash out refinance where I just pulled out $357,000 tax free. That portfolio was now worth over $700,000, and I had paid $180 for it back in 2019. Here's the thing that I often ask people: what more proof or validation do you need that if you are not investing in real estate, your life will not change? And so when I started sharing those stories with Katina signs up. We took her to one bank. We got her $125,000. We then took her to Chase, got her like another $70,000. Accumulatively, we got Katina Street almost $300,000 of capital tax free that she was able to amass in less than 6 months. And she's been buying real estate ever since. Katina doesn't work a 9-to-5. She's actually retired. Katina was able to make sure that her mother was secure financially. Katina was able to take care of her sister. Katina was able to have a property so that her family could live in. Or you have my client, Brian Shaw, out of Queens, New York, who had been trying to invest in a multitude of things, but didn't have the strategy, didn't have the formula, didn't have the blueprint. And he actually was attempting to try to do all of these things on his own. We'll go on YouTube, watch this video. We'll hop on a live, watch this video. We'll jump in my live and try to piecemeal all this information together. And attempted to get a couple things on his own. It didn't work. It worked, but it didn't work. Until Brian buckled down and actually followed the blueprint. One bank got Brian $125,000 from one bank. Accumulatively, we got him over $200-something thousand. Brian closed on his investment property I think like September, October. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want you to feel like you have to know everything. You don't have to know anything about real estate. We do all the work for you. We do all the work for you. Or take my client, Jahad Jones, 24 years old, was discharged from the military, didn't even have a job, but he was coachable. He was willing to work. And he had a burning desire to change his circumstance. He said, Will, I want to be able to retire my mom's. I want to be able to not have to work until I'm 80 years old. Because y'all do know ain't no pensions around anymore. 401ks, I don't know what they're going to look like in 20 years. So Jahad Jones at 24 years old followed the blueprint to now Jahad Jones has almost $1 million real estate portfolio at 24. Worst case scenario, Jahad could borrow against that real estate portfolio, pull $500,000 tax free, live off the $500,000, and his monthly expense would only be $4,700 a month. And the properties would cover that. You can't even live in Iowa for $4,700 a month. No disrespect to Iowa. Why would I not want to play the game that gives me the greatest odds of winning at life? That's the game that I'm going to play. So Katina Street, she owned some property, but she wanted a new strategy. So she started working with me. We positioned her to start using the bank's money now. We position her to start using the bank's money. And now Katina will never have to use or save money ever again in her life. Y'all do know that wealthy people live off of debt, right? Let me say that again. Y'all do know wealthy people live off of debt. See, y'all out here trying to figure out all of these tax strategies. The only way you can live tax-free is you have to leverage debt. I don't care how many miles you write off on your car. I don't care how many uniforms you tell your tax person you done bought. You can only get so many school tax credits. You can come up with all of the fake deductions. You can write off your auntie's kids. The only way you can truly play the tax game is you have to know how to leverage debt where it's making you money. That's the only way. So Katina learned how to play that game. Brian Shaw wanted to go the traditional route of starting a business. And he found out that every single month he started from zero. He had to focus on customers. He had to focus on marketing. He had to focus on sales. And he was still trying to do all of this and still live his regular life until he learned the blueprint of leveraging other people's money, leveraging the bank's money, to the point to where as soon as he followed the blueprint, he closed on his deal literally within 60 days. Because he didn't have to think. He didn't have to think about the guesswork. Or Jahad Jones, 24 years old, discharged out the military, didn't even have a job. If you have a job and you're like 30 or 40 or 50 and you still not positioning yourself, I'm going to just be honest. I feel sorry for you. And the reason I feel sorry for you is because you're going to have to work forever. You're going to have to work forever. Unless you own a string of barber shops and you're a barber, you're going to always have to cut hair. If you want to open up that restaurant, unless you learn how to franchise and expand and you're willing to have a manager come in and run it for $150,000 a year, you're going to always be the one dropping the fries. And you're going to be paying 30% in taxes. But until you learn how to play this game, other people's money, you're going to forever be on the hamster wheel chasing pipe dreams that these online gurus are selling you. You're going to forever be chasing these pipe dreams that these online gurus are selling you. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow night I'm actually hosting a webinar. It's going to be at 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Central. Mark your calendars. We going in tomorrow. Look, here's my promise. If you don't feel that If you don't feel that tomorrow's webinar is of value, I will give you one of my courses for free. You need to show up tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to be teaching you how to I'm going to be giving you away the framework for you to be able to get your first or your next investment property within the next 90 days. I'm going to be showing you how to get $150,000 worth of business funding, which is all tax-free. If you're on Instagram, I need you to go and just go into any of the comments or DM me the word invest if you're on my Instagram page. If you're on YouTube right now or Facebook, I need you to go and follow me on Instagram and DM me the word invest. Let me drop my Instagram here in the chat. DM me the word invest. I'm going to give you the framework, play by play. I'm going to give you the exact framework that Brian Shaw used, the exact same framework that Katina Street used, the exact same framework that Isaac Tate used. Isaac's getting ready to retire from the military. He's 31 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, I have people who are going to be retiring before their parents. Isaac is 31 years old. He has like an $800,000 real estate portfolio. He did this in less than 2 years. If you're on YouTube or Facebook, you have to DM me invest from Instagram. Go to Instagram or DM me. Or you can go to rei90.com. Bottom line, you don't want to miss this webinar. You do not want to miss this webinar. Bring all your questions. Bring all your doubts. I want you to challenge on, I want you to come and say, man, Will, what about this? What about that? I'm going to break all of that down tomorrow. That's a fact. Few more deals and I'm out the door. Isaac said, Will, I get about 2-3 more deals. I can leave the military. I remember I seen one of his rental deposits. I don't want to put all his business out there. It was like $4,000. I'm like, man, so you're making $48,000 from your rental income. This was like last year. That's what some people make on their regular 9 to 5. He's doing that from his living room. Because I don't even think he's seen any of his properties yet. We teach the framework, ladies and gentlemen. We teach the framework. My son, who's 15, has a 4-unit. He's never seen it. 15 years old. You think I'm not about to teach my son to have standards when he's ready to start dating? Look, somebody's daughter gonna have to. They're gonna have to have their stuff together. They want to date my son. He gonna be a millionaire by the time he's 18. So if you're following me on Instagram, DM me the word invest. Tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to literally give away the framework on how to get your first or next investment property in the next 90 days and how to get $150,000 in business funding. Because I don't want you to use your own money. I don't care how much money you have in the bank. I don't want you to use your own money. I don't want you to use your own money. Every deal we close getting done right from the living room. Imagine this. Let me paint this picture for y'all real quick. Imagine being able to invest in real estate and never have to leave your house. You have a real team. See, when you open up that restaurant, you have to pay a server before you make $1. When you open that restaurant, you got to pay a general manager before you sell a French fry. You got to pay the cashier. You got to pay the janitor. So I was talking to someone earlier today, and he's looking to open up a medical facility. And he said, Will, I have to buy X, Y, and Z just to be able to get the doors open. And I said, so how much is the all-in cost? He said, Will, I got to spend $300,000 just before I open the doors. And it's no guarantee I'm making any money. Could you imagine investing $300,000 in a business and you don't even know if it's going to work? There's no recourse for if it doesn't work. But could you imagine buying an investment property that's worth $300,000? You only got to put down 20%, which is $60,000. And at the end of the day, you make money from month one. The people you hire only make money when you make money. And if life went haywire, you could at least sell the property to get back even. But yet you still need proof that it works. That's why you will have to work until you're 80. King Will, how much cash flow would you suggest you need before quitting your 9 to 5? Brandon Smith, great question. So I actually learned this from Rich Dad Poor Dad. You want to be at 3 times your expenses. See, the reason a lot of people will never be able to quit their job, one, because you have to figure out how to get your expenses down, and you got to figure out how to make money without working additional hours. Your expenses have to, your cash flow should exceed your expenses times 3. You'll never be able to do that working a second job. It'll take you forever to do that starting a business. Because here's the thing. I was watching a video. I forgot who the singer was. I think Money Long. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing her name. And she said, I did not realize how expensive it is to do an album. Ladies and gentlemen, everything costs. If you're trying to start a business, it is going to be expensive. Your marketing cost alone. I would rather put my money in real estate, and then the money I'm making in real estate, once I've stabilized my finances, then I'll go start that business. Because if you lose and trick all your money off starting a business, you won't be able to start over. At least if something happens with the real estate, I could start over. About to start investing from my living room while eating popcorn. Jay's life. Man, let me tell y'all, it's no better feeling than that. Look, I bought a property from the airplane one time. I was 30,000 feet up in the air with my feet kicked up, laying down in the Delta 1 seat, and I signed a purchase agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, it's no better feeling than that. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no better feeling than knowing every single month, you know you have a certain amount of revenue coming in, whether you punch a clock, whether you placate to people on social media, whether you can sell off the tick. Like, you don't have to be performative in real estate. Let me say that again. You don't have to be performative on social media to live the life you want to live when you own real estate. That was my motivation. So imagine whatever your circumstance is right now, whatever your scenario is. Brandon said your expenses are $3,000 a month. Okay, so your goal should be, how fast can you get to $9,000 in 2026? Believe it or not, that's like 10 doors. You may be asking yourself, is that 10 properties? No, 10 doors. You can buy 2 4-families in a 2-family. You're at 10 doors already. Isaac just closed on a 4-family. If I told y'all what he invested for that 4-family, I was so proud of him, because man, he's catching deals that people in other markets are only dreaming about catching. I caught an 8-unit for $433. It's already valued at like $800,000. I had it a year. Somebody do the math. 8 doors, $1,100 a door. Somebody tell me what that math is. 8 doors at $1,100 a door. Let me grab my calculator. 8 doors, $1,100. That's $8,800. One deal can change your life, ladies and gentlemen. One deal can change your life, especially when it's positioned properly. So I need you to meet me on this webinar tomorrow. Again, DM me the word invest. You'll get the instructions on how to join. It's completely free. It's completely free. Come there. I'm going to give you the framework that I gave Katina, that I gave Isaac, that I gave Jihad, that I gave Brian. And you meet me there. I promise you, your life will never be the same after this webinar tomorrow. I appreciate that, Will, for real. But it's all because of the system you put in place and following the steps you laid out. You're welcome, Isaac. Yeah, it's a blueprint, ladies and gentlemen. No different than going to college. You've been following a blueprint all your life. It's just that you're following the path of a blueprint that isn't working anymore. So DM me the word invest. I appreciate y'all being on this live with me. And make sure you bring your pens, your pads, your questions, and all of those things. And y'all already know, more importantly, I'll see y'all at the top. Let's go.